Hello, everyone. My name is Kanisha Brown. My presentation is about Carl Rogers and the humanistic approach from Chapter 13 in our History of Modern Psychology textbook. The music you hear in the background is from Carl Orff's music, which is sometimes played in therapy sessions by therapists who use the humanistic psychotherapy approach. There are two American psychologists that receive credit for the humanistic approach. That is Abraham Maslow, who is on the left, and Carl Rogers, who is on the right. Abraham Maslow was born in 1908 and died in 1970, and Carl Rogers was born in 1902 and died in 1987. The humanistic approach formed in the 1950s, after the contributions of Maslow and Rogers. The picture I have above is an example of how an individual holds the world, or shall I say perceives the world. This type of psychology believes that someone's behavior is based on their thought of the world and focuses on self-actualization. Being that most or all of us are psychology majors, we've heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you haven't heard, it is a theory of needs created by Abraham Maslow in the shape of a pyramid. The humanistic approach that I'm discussing focuses on self-actualization, which is at the top of the pyramid. In order for an individual to reach self-actualization, they must first satisfy all other needs: physiological, safety, social, and esteem needs. Carl Rogers was born to a strict Protestant family who believed that all pleasures of the world were sinful. To get away from this sin, his family moved to a small farm. He thought he wanted to be a minister, so he enrolled into agriculture. After receiving his bachelor's, he enrolled in the Union Theological Seminar, but changed his mind about being a minister. He moved to Columbia to work for a children's school. This is where he met Lita Hollingsworth, who influenced him to be a child psychologist. In the picture, you can see her interacting with children, and one seems to be laughing or smiling as she's talking about something. During his time there, he took an internship that gave him insight to Sigmund Freud, who was on the left, but developed a dislike or somewhat dislike for his psychoanalysis. After receiving his doctorate in New York, he joined a society that specialized in the cruelty prevention of children. Despite the fact that he didn't really agree with Freud, he took an interest in his protege Otto Rank. In his psychotherapy, he is pictured on the right. Around the same time, he was influenced by Elizabeth Davis to take up relationship therapy. The idea that human qualities were important and listening to clients intrigued Rogers and promoted his first book called The Clinical Treatment of the Problem Child. This is really where his fame started because he discussed psychoanalysis and relationship therapy. He discussed how important it was for parents to support their children and discussed how important having a relationship with a therapist was. In his second book, Counseling and Psychotherapy, he discussed relationship therapy and clinical work. The term person-centered therapy came about and had three components. The therapist must be genuine, the therapist must accept the client the way they are, and the therapist must have empathy for the client. He also developed what was called a reflection because he knew it wasn't easy to understand someone, so a therapist could reflect or relay in other words what the client was trying to say. Most of Rogers' education and contributions was during the World War II. World War II had just ended in 1945, and war veterans needed help coping with the way of life. With many of them having post-traumatic stress syndrome, they needed therapy that would be beneficial, so this therapy was right on time. If this therapy worked, they would show less psychotic behavior. During the next several years, Rogers faced criticism about his person-centered psychotherapy and the humanistic approach. It was a simple process of caring, but psychiatrists who favored psychoanalysis couldn't grasp that and felt that it should be a medical specialization. This is really when person, or shall I say client-centered therapy, became popular in the 1950s, thus helping create the humanistic approach or the caring approach. After those psychiatrists failed attempt in a 1955 meeting for counseling and therapy in New York, Rogers' person-centered therapy had broken the mold between child guidance and social work. And this is one of the reasons why the humanistic approach is still very popular today. Without Maslow and Rogers' contributions, we wouldn't know how important it is for a client to trust, and we wouldn't know how important it is to care. Think about when we see something on TV or we make a face and we have this negative thought. Well, if it wasn't for them, I believe many people would do that in therapy when they're in sessions. They wouldn't know how important it is to not be biased, because in therapy, you really must care about the client, and it's all about them. I know there's a lot of times people have situations and lifestyles that we don't necessarily agree with, but in therapy, in the humanistic approach, it is all about caring, and we must care. Think about, as I was discussing, the reflections that Roger developed. When we are having a conversation with a family member or a friend, and say, for instance, they're crying, we're trying to understand what they are saying. So to get a feel of what they're saying, we reflect what we're thinking in our minds to see if that is what they're trying to say. So believe it or not, we think of the humanistic approach, or we incorporate the humanistic approach. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. My name is Kanisha Brown, and I hope you all enjoyed it.